In Victorian Britain, a woman's reputation was everything. And when that reputation was threatened, the consequences could be lethal. Welcome back to Victorian True Crime. Today we're talking about Madeleine Smith, a young, educated, upper middle class Scottish woman accused of murdering her lover with arsenic. The sensationalist scandal gave Victorian Scotland its trial of the century, resulting in one of the most controversial verdicts in British legal history. Born in 1835 in Glasgow, Madeleine Smith was the eldest of 5 children. She was intelligent, well-read, fluent in French, and hailed from an upper-middle-class family of celebrated Scottish architects. As an attractive, accomplished young lady of respectable society, her future was carefully planned. A good marriage, social stability, a proper ladylike existence. But even the best-laid plans can go awry. And Madeleine's life was about to veer dramatically off course. In 1855, at the age of 20, Madeleine broke a cardinal rule of respectable Victorian society when she became involved in a secret, passionate affair with a man considered entirely unsuitable. His name was Pierre-Émile Langelier, and if her parents had known about him at the time, they would probably have had a proper Victorian conniption fit. For one thing, he was 30, 10 years older than their unwed daughter. He was also a foreigner, gasp, a Frenchman, who was described as handsome and charming but emotionally volatile. And, scandal of scandal, he was working class. The son of a mere gardener, Langelier now worked as a warehouse packing clerk. In short, he was unequivocally not marriage material for a young lady of good social standing. But what did Madeleine care? She was in love. The relationship began innocently enough, but quickly escalated into something intense, clandestine, and emotionally messy. The two met in secret. They exchanged letters, hundreds of them. And these were not discreet letters. They were obsessive, sexually charged, dramatic, and increasingly desperate. Entirely in the dark about the affair, Madeleine's family arranged her engagement to one of their own set. William Minnock was a prosperous merchant and an eminently more suitable match. And actually, Madeleine didn't protest. By 1857, her relationship with Langelier had curdled into something dangerous. And even she seemed aware that this youthful fling had run its course. Minnock proposed, and Madeleine accepted. There was only one problem. Langelier was under the impression that he was engaged to Madeleine. She had surrendered her virtue to him after all, and the two had unofficially agreed to marry over the course of their relationship. Madeleine tried to end the affair with Langelier, and in February of 1857, she asked him to return all of her letters. Langelier did not take it well. In fact, he went full nuclear, stating to friends that he would not allow Smith to marry another man as long as he himself lived. In an attempt to force her to marry him, he threatened to expose the letters to her family and the larger public. And make no mistake, this was a serious threat. Those letters would utterly destroy Madeleine's reputation, her engagement, and her family's respectability. For a Victorian woman, public sexual scandal wasn't just humiliating. It was social death. We can only imagine Madeleine's panic. But then, Pierre-Émile Langelier fell violently ill. Over several weeks, Langelier suffered repeated bouts of vomiting, stomach pains, fever. And on March 23rd, 1857, he died. The cause? Arsenic poisoning. Investigators soon discovered that Madeleine Smith had repeatedly been to a local druggist shop where she had purchased arsenic, allegedly to kill rats. They also discovered that in the weeks before his death, Langelier had at least once consumed cocoa Madeleine had prepared for him. And then there were the letters. Madeleine was arrested on March 31st, 1857. The case was an instant media sensation. Well before the trial began, people were already jockeying for seats in the courtroom. And that trial did not disappoint. When it opened in June of 1857, the prosecution unveiled their most explosive evidence: Madeleine's letters to Langelier. They were read aloud in open court to an audience that included polite society, gawkers, and newspaper reporters eager for a scandal. The letters revealed a woman who was passionate, manipulative, fearful, possibly trapped. But did they prove murder? That was the problem. Clearly, Madeleine had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. And Langelier's friends testified that in the depths of his illness, he had stated to them he believed that Madeleine might actually be poisoning him. The prosecution had a good case, but the defense had a few solid counter-arguments of their own, mainly hinging on the possibility of accidental poisoning or self-unaliving. Used for a variety of innocent reasons, arsenic was easily available in Victorian society. In fact, Langelier had his own supply. He also had more than once threatened to unalive himself, both in a letter to Madeleine and to friends. No one had seen Madeleine administer the poison, and she had supposedly been keeping a wide berth from her former lover after she had become engaged. The defense further argued that the quantity of arsenic found in the dead man's body was much greater than that which could have been hidden in a single cup of cocoa. In fact, the amount consumed was only ever seen in cases of self-unaliving. That is, when the victim was well aware of what and how much they were consuming. The evidence against Madeleine was strong, but entirely circumstantial, a point which her solicitor hammered home in what was applauded as a masterclass in criminal defense. After days of testimony and intense public scrutiny, the jury was left to deliberate. They were out for half an hour. When they returned, the entire courtroom held its collective breath as the verdict was read. Not proven. A unique characteristic of Scottish law, a verdict of not proven is an acquittal with the same effect as not guilty, but with an underlying subtext of, we actually think you did it, but the prosecution couldn't prove it. This nuance allows the jury to specify whether the evidence alone provides enough proof of the accused's guilt or innocence, although the verdict itself carries an implication of guilt. When the verdict was read, the court erupted in cheers. Interestingly, but perhaps not surprisingly, public sentiment was predominantly on Madeleine's side. Her youth, beauty, and social class likely contributed to this, but there was also a degree of contempt for the victim and the unchivalrous actions he had taken to blackmail his former lover. So prevalent was this sentiment that, as one contemporary journalist wrote, quote, one frequently heard the remark, well, if she did not poison him, she ought to have done it. Sure, there were many who believed she was a cold, calculating poisoner who had escaped justice. But many others believed she was a young woman crushed by Victorian sexual hypocrisy, punished not for murder, but for her own feminine desire. Madeleine Smith may have been acquitted and spared from the gallows, but the scandal had done irreversible damage to her reputation. In the aftermath of the trial, her family was forced to move away from Glasgow and live in obscurity. Madeleine would go on to marry 4 years later. She had children, became an activist, and generally lived what sounds like a full, happy life before dying at the ripe old age of 93 in 1928. Pierre-Emile Langelier was buried, his death officially unresolved, leaving us one of the greatest unanswered questions of Victorian true crime. Was Madeleine Smith a murderer, or simply a woman trapped by a society that left her very few options and no safe choices?